I want to give a special shout out to all my patrons first. Thank you so much to my Bibliospren, Bibliohowlers, and my Bibliomancers. It means a lot to me that you give me your extra support for my passion and hobby. Hi everyone, Petrik here. So in today's video, this will be an updated ranking video because today I'll be talking about all the best self-published fantasy books that I have read as of the year 2023. And in total, apparently I have read a total of 170 self-published fantasy books. This number will only go up as I progress through the years because there are just so many incredible and interesting self-published fantasy books that I want to read. So I checked my videos, and apparently the last time I made this kind of list, it was in March 2021. So yeah, it's almost 3 years ago. So I think it is the right time for me to make this video before I talk about all the best books that I read within this year next week. So out of 170 self-published fantasy books, I will be ranking the top 15. Yeah, it is not easy to compress and rank them into the top 15, but I think I feel a bit confident. I feel quite confident about my list for today's video. And just as a heads up, I will only mention one book per series, and then at the same time, I will not be including all the self-published fantasy books that are now traditionally published. There are just too many of them to mention in one video. So yeah, let's get started. And if you compare the list in today's video to my previous list in March 2021, you will see there are a lot of changes. 9 of the books that I'm going to mention today are not included in the previous list. So yeah, a lot of things have changed. I keep on finding new great self-published fantasy books to include and talk about. So yeah, let's start at the number 15 spot. This one definitely still appears in my previous list, and this is The Mirror's Truth by Michael R. Fletcher. This is the second book in the Manifest Delusion series. I have actually finished reading the Manifest Delusion series, but A War to End All, the third and the final book, ended up becoming the weakest of the entire trilogy in my opinion, and this still stays strong as the best book by Michael Fletcher for me. Even during second read, it still remains incredible. I think A War to End All, it's kind of like a long epilogue to The Mirror's Truth, and this is really the climax of the Manifest Delusion series. Loved everything about this one, and if you love grimdark fantasy series, and hopefully you're not too fluent in German, I do highly recommend you to still pick up the Manifest Delusion series. The concept behind the magic and the world of the Manifest Delusion is just absolutely brilliant, and also the main three of the Manifest Delusion series, they are just so distinct and memorable. And moving on to the number 14 spot, this is a new addition to this list, and this is Reaper by Will White. This is the 10th book in the Cradle series, and in my opinion, the best book in the entire Cradle series. And I think some of you might think that, what, this is only ranked at the number 14 spot? Well, I think this is just a testament on how good the rest of the books in today's video, in my opinion anyway. But yeah, Reaper, the 10th book in the series, is my favorite book in the entire Cradle series, and yeah, I have finished reading the entire series, but Reaper is the one with the ending that really made me gasp, and also it was just mind-blowing because it focused on probably my favorite character in the entire Cradle series, and the revelations, although predictable, still remain absolutely mind-blowing and stunning. I cannot talk too much about this one though because it is just insane spoilers all around, but yeah, Reaper is my favorite in the entire Cradle, and this is in my number 14 spot for the best self-published fantasy book that I have ever read. And moving on to the number 13 spot, this is again a new addition to this list, and this one is Mother of Learning by Nobody 103 or Domagoj Kurmaj. So I just read the entire series within this year, and honestly speaking, if I were to actually rank the series as a whole, this would rank so much higher on my list of favorite self-published fantasy books. But for now, I'm going to choose Mother of Learning Arc 4. This is Arc 1, but I'm going to choose Mother of Learning Arc 4 in my number 13 spot. The problem with Mother of Learning in this ranking is that it is originally a web novel, and the 4 volumes in Mother of Learning published by Raidmark Creative, although the division do make sense, they are just still very connected across one another because it was originally a web novel and it should be treated like one despite the division into 4 volumes. But this is a time travel progression fantasy, and I really enjoyed this one. Although the first 25% of the first volume did take me some time to get used to, but the entire series, especially Mother of of Learning Arc 4 was just so satisfying to read through. If you love reading time travel, you love coming of age, magical school, you cannot go wrong with reading The Mother of Learning by Nobody 103 or Domagoj Krumach. I know that I have become a fan of this author's work, and I will definitely read more books or more web novel series by him. So yeah, Mother of Learning Arc 4 will be at the number 13 spot for me. Moving on to the next one, this is again another book that I just finished reading this year, and this is Esarhaddon by Michael J. Sullivan. Again, just like Mother of Learning, if it weren't for one particular issue that I have with the book, Esarhaddon would rank so much higher on this list as well. But for those of you who don't know, this is the third and the final book in the Rise and Fall trilogy, the bridge trilogy from Legends of the First Empire to the Rhyria Chronicles and the Rhyria Revelations. And yes, this one do take place in the world of Elan as well. In fact, I do think that Esarhaddon kind of work as a culmination to everything that Michael J. Sullivan has published in the world of Elan so far. If you have read the Rhyria Revelation, at least the Rhyria Revelations, and also Legends of the First Empire, I cannot imagine you not liking Esarhaddon. It is also the biggest work published by Michael J. Sullivan so far. I think this entire one book is as big as the entire Heir of Navran omnibus, which consists of Wintertide and also Persepliquis. Now that name, Persepliquis, the revelations and the details of everything that happened inside the city will be explained and explored in details in Esarhaddon, and I am just amazed by everything that happened within this book. Almost everything anyway, because I do think there were, well, a few POV characters that I think was just unnecessary. I mean, right now I don't even remember their names. Having them as POV characters actually decreased the compelling ability of the pacing of the entire narrative, because I love Esarhaddon. He's just such an important character in the world of Elan, especially in the Rhyria Revelations, and to have a coming-of-age tale of Esarhaddon in this book is just incredible, and I applaud Michael J. Sullivan for it. There were some scenes in Avamparta inside Esarhaddon that definitely gave me goosebumps. If you have read the Rhyria Revelations and you have read Esarhaddon, you will know which scene I am talking about. It is amazing, and it has something to do with whispers and voices. But overall, I am certainly satisfied with Esarhaddon. The ending was amazing. And moving on to the number 11 spot, we have Ill-Born by Daniel T. Jackson. Take a look at how beautiful this edition is. This one is published by the Broken Binding Press, and this comes with a new cover art by Katrina Paints. I think it looks absolutely stunning. But Ill-Born by Daniel T. Jackson is the first book in the Ill-Born saga quartet. It is a quartet. There will be 4 books long, and so far 2 books are out in the series. I have read I Dual Sin as well, the sequel, but if I have to choose, I think Ill-Born is a greater book. Ill-Born as a series starter is just absolutely compelling from the beginning to the end for me. The prologue itself is already one of the best prologues that I have ever read, and then it just stays strong throughout the entire book. It's so hard to put down, and if you are someone, a reader who loves reading character-driven fantasy and also chapters that constantly ends on a cliffhanger, then Ill-Born is the book for you. This one is told from the perspective of 4 main characters. Each of them are distinct and they have their own strengths. One of the characters in this one, Alana, is one of the most despicable characters that I have come across, and I just absolutely loathed this character. I think though, this character has always been designed to be hated, and on that, I think, well, Daniel Jackson succeeded at that. But I end up loving the other 3 characters very much. Arion, Corin, and also Liana. I'm curious to find out whether the second half of the Ill-Born saga will be as good as Ill-Born. But it is definitely easy for me to say that this is one of the best start to a sub-hobbyist fantasy series. And now we are entering the top 10 spot, and at the number 10 spot, I'm going to choose Spirits of Vengeance by Rob J. Hayes. This is the 3rd book in the Mortal Technique series of connected standalone novels. And this one, although I really love Never Die, I think many of you know that I am a huge fan of Never Die. And then I also enjoyed Pawn's Gambit, the 2nd book in the Mortal Techniques. But the best one of them all is definitely Spirits of Vengeance. This one is epic. It is glorious, it is brutal, sometimes also hilarious, but I think this one, the main reason why I really like Spirits of Vengeance, on top of it being the biggest of the entire series, It's just the anime inspiration and also the wuxia inspiration are cleverly infused into the narrative, and there were some section here that definitely reminded me a lot of reading the best moments in some shonen anime. I have been a fan of Rob J. Hayes' books ever since I read Never Die, but yeah, this guy released so many books so rapidly, and right now I'm behind by, I think, 8 books, if I'm not mistaken, 8 or 9 books. And also he's going to release 3 more books next year, at least 3 more books next year. So yeah, I still have a lot of books by him to catch up on, but for now, out of everything that I have read from Rob J. Hayes, Spirits of Vengeance is my favorite. It is incredibly unforgettable, and if you love reading Asian-inspired fantasy, you love reading martial arts, and also you love reading anime-inspired fantasy novel, definitely read the Mortal Technique series by Rob J. Hayes. And yeah, this one is the best. Look at this cover art by Felix Ortiz. I think Felix Ortiz, every time he's paired with Rob J. Hayes, always comes up with some of the best artworks. And moving on, just like Spirits of Vengeance, this is again a new addition to this list, and it is a book that I just finished reading earlier this year. So this one is 11th Cycle by Kian Ardalan, a Dark Souls and Berserk, also Hollow Knight inspired fantasy novel, a grimdark fantasy novel, and I think, in my opinion, one of the most criminally underrated fantasy novel right now. On Goodreads right now, the average rating is about 3.7 if I'm not mistaken, but I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. I noticed the issue that some people, and I also understand why some people have issues with 11th Cycle, the first book in the Mistland series, but they did not bother me as much. I'm a fan of character-driven grimdark fantasy, and I think Kian Ardalan definitely understands the cryptic and hidden storytelling that is spread around From Software games, and it is put into 11th Cycle as well. This does not mean that 11th Cycle is super difficult to understand. You can definitely understand the main story, but there are just so many hidden world building and implications hidden throughout the narrative and also the epigraphs. So yeah, love everything about this one, but also do know that this one is insanely dark and violent. The book actually opens up with a trigger warning, and yeah, just like Berserk by Kentaro Miura, it is certainly not for the faint of heart. And let's move on to the number 8 spot. We have Dragon Mage by M.L. Spencer. Yeah, this one also appears in my previous list, and of course it will continue to appear time and time again in my list of best self-published fantasy books because it is just that good. This is the kind of fantasy book that reminded me why I love reading classic epic fantasy in the first place. I have mentioned how this year and also last year is practically the year of Dragon Rider epic fantasy. But before that, we already have Dragon Mage in the year, I think 2021 or 2020. And right from the first few chapters, I was already immersed and also in love with the main character, Aram. I think Aram is just such a lovable main character, and it is very easy to feel emotionally invested in Aram. Plus, his relationship and his brotherhood with Marcus definitely reminded me a lot of Frodo and Samwise Gamgee. The Dragon Rider aspect is certainly one of the best that I have read in epic fantasy novels as well. I am really glad that I took a chance upon Dragon Mage, and originally this was supposed to be a one-off standalone novel, only 1 book and then done, but due to overwhelming demand, it has become a trilogy. The second book, Champion of the Fallen, is still not out yet. I actually have no idea when that will come out, but whenever that is ready, it will be a big priority read for me. But for now, you can certainly treat this as a one-off standalone novel, and it will be an incredibly satisfying reading experience. Assuming that you do love reading classic fantasy, Dragon Rider fantasy, and of course coming of age fantasy. At the moment, I am waiting for my copy of the deluxe edition, of the deluxe leather-bound edition of Dragon Mage. I think it will start to arrive next month or in February, so yeah, I cannot wait for that. And once that Kickstarter edition do arrive, I think I will do a second read of Dragon Mage using that beautiful special edition. And at the number 7 spot, we have another book by Michael J. Sullivan, and this is a new addition to this list. This is The Death of Dulgat by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the 3rd book in the Rhyria Chronicle series, so yeah, it is not the same series as the Rise and Fall trilogy. This one features our beloved duo, Royce and Hadrian. The Rhyria Chronicles is the prequel series to the Rhyria Revelations that depicted the many adventures of Royce and Hadrian since their first encounter and their first friendship with one another. And The Death of Dulgat is actually the first standalone tale in the Rhyria in the Rairia series. But do note that although this one can be treated as a standalone novel, I still would not recommend you to jump into The Death of Dulgat as your first Royce and Hadrian reading experience. There are a lot of backgrounds, there are a lot of personality to understand from the two main characters, and I think it would benefit you a lot to understand them first before reading The Death of Dulgat. But this one is a murder mystery and also an epic fantasy novel. And I did read The Death of Dulgat before I read through the rest of the Legends of the First Empire. I did, I think, finish reading Age of Myth first before I read The Death of Dulgat, and it was already beneficial to my reading experience. There were some lore and world-building implications related to the Legends of the First Empire, and I have no doubt that if I read The Death of Dulgat now, my experience will be improved even more because I have finished reading Legends of the First Empire. But yeah, this one is a murder mystery, and it was the first time I encountered someone super despicable from Michael J. Sullivan's books. And of course, that has been proven time and time again from reading Legends of the First Empire and also Ashura Hadon. But yeah, this one was the first time because this villain is just insanely hateable. And I think it goes to show just how good Michael J. Sullivan is at writing characters, not just the lovable one, but also the hateable one. Drew Mindor, the 5th book in the Rairia Chronicles, will come out next year. And of course, it is one of my most anticipated novels of next year. I cannot wait to be back with Royce and Hadrian again. We have arrived at the number 6 spot, and believe me, starting from now, from number 6 up to number 2, I think every one of these are interchangeable depending on my reading mood. But for the sake of ranking and for the sake of this video, let's just try to rank them. And at the number 6 spot, I have Kings of Heaven by Richard Nell. It is already difficult for me to choose between Kings of Ash and also Kings of Heaven, the second and the third book in the Ash and Sand trilogy. But let's say I have to choose, I think I'm going to choose Kings of Heaven, the third and the final book in the Ash and Sand trilogy, as the number 6 spot. And I think that's also kind of surprising because Kings of Heaven is actually the smallest book in the trilogy, in the Ash and Sand trilogy. But if we are talking about culmination and also conclusion, this is one of the best out there. Not just when I'm talking about self-published fantasy series, but really in the entire fantasy genre. Love everything about it, and I think Ruka, son of Bela, remained distinct and memorable as one of the best characters to ever appear in grimdark fantasy genre. There were some scenes and sequences in Kings of Heaven that definitely made me want to fist pump because it was just so awesome. And because of that, I think I will have to choose Kings of Heaven over Kings of Ash. But do understand that they are both absolutely amazing. And now we are entering the top 5 spot, and at the number 5 spot, this is a book that has appeared on my previous list, and it is Paternus, War of Gods by Derek Ashton. This is the third and the final book in the Paternus trilogy, and this is incredibly epic. And if we're talking about epic scope, this one and the next book I'm going to mention, they are both the most epic self-published fantasy book that I have ever read. The scope in this one is just absolutely insane. I'm still so amazed by the way Derek Ashton implement and combine mythologies from across the world in such a detailed manner with epic fantasy, and it all worked out so well. None of them ever felt forced. Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, Japanese mythology, and then Chinese mythology. You will see all of them included across the Paternus trilogy. And yeah, everything came to a clash in a form of Ragnarok in Paternus, War of Gods. Recently, Derek Ashton has released a new book titled Kraken Rider Z, and I cannot wait to read that early next year. But yeah, for now, if you still haven't read the Paternus trilogy yet, and you love mythology and also epic fantasy, if we are talking about scope, urban fantasy doesn't get more epic than Paternus, War of Gods. And at the number 4 spot, this is the biggest book in the entire list, one of the biggest books that I have ever read, and it is Of War and Ruin by Ryan Cahill. Yeah, I read this one in January 2023 as well. And of course, this will have to be one of my favorite books, one of my favorite self-published fantasy books, and also one of my favorite books of all time. This is the best book in the Bound and the Broken series. And for those of you who haven't started reading The Bound and the Broken, I have made a video on why you should read The Bound and the Broken, and I think you should check that one out. But to put it really simply, if you love a classic epic fantasy that is told with a modern voice and modern narrative style, you have to read The Bound and the Broken. Even more so if you love Dragon Rider epic fantasy as well. As Ryan Cahill always said, dragons are pretty much just dogs in fantasy, and I agree with him. But there are just so many amazing things done in Of War and Ruin. Of Darkness and Light was already a step up from Of Blood and Fire, a huge step up in my opinion, in terms of writing, in terms of scope, in terms of everything really. But Of War and Ruin raised them all up even further. Extensively, I will say there were a myriad of scenes that definitely tug at my heartstrings, and also one of the scenes here, and Ryan Cahill know what I'm talking about. I think many of you know what I'm talking about if you have read The Bond and the Broken, regarding Dane Arteris, and it is just so pivotal and so iconic, super iconic. If Ryan Cahill and the Broken Binding Press doesn't release an interior artwork on that scene during Of War and Ruin the Broken Binding Press edition, I will riot. I need that scene to be illustrated. For that one, I'm just talking about one scene, and there were multiple iconic scenes in Of War and Ruin. Amazing stuff really, and it makes me super excited to read Of Empires and Dust, hopefully within next year or early 2025. I think Ryan Cahill's rise and fame is unstoppable. It will only continue to escalate from here on out. And moving on to the number 3 spot, this is the last new addition to the list, and we have Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. This is the newest standalone novel by M.L. Wang, and well, M.L. Wang has proven that The Sword of Kaigen was not a fluke. This is another absolutely incredible standalone novel. It is a dark academia novel. I think can be recommended to those who love reading The Full Metal Alchemist. If you love the magic system and you love the law of equivalent exchange in the Full Metal Alchemist manga and anime, then I think you really should read Blood Over Brighthaven. It is not as big as The Sword of Kaigen, but the thematic narrative of injustice, prejudice, and also racial issue, they are just so well done in the Blood Over Brighthaven. And remember that this is a one-off standalone novel. There is no sequel, there is no prequel. It is a one and done. And for that, I think it is another astounding achievement from M.L. Wang to craft something as well polished and also intricate as Blood Over Brighthaven in one-off standalone novel. Usually it will require multiple books to craft something as good as this. But yeah, I do think that this is dark academia novel at its best, and it is even better than Babel by R.F. Kuang in my opinion, and I already really love Babel by R.F. Kuang. And we only have 2 more books to talk about today, and if you know me, then I think you will know what these 2 books are. At the runner-up spot, we have Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Litzau. I have talked about how much I love Dreams of the Dying by Nicholas Litzau multiple times on my YouTube channel. I have done a full spoiler review of it as well. But again, this is a character-driven, a grimdark fantasy which deals with the theme of melancholia and depression very heavily, and I loved it for that. I think the way Nicholas Litzau writes characters is just compelling. The narration is hard to put down, and also, even though the main characters do questionable things, especially one of the other main characters, the man, even when they did questionable actions, I still cannot help but continue reading. I wanted to continue reading to find out what's going to happen next. If you haven't read Dreams of the Dying yet, think of it as Inception in the Polynesian fantasy world, and it worked absolutely well as a one-off standalone novel, but there will be a sequel coming. I think most likely within next year. The title is The Cure for Living, and Nicholas Litzau is very confident it will be even better than Dreams of the Dying, and of course it is one of my most anticipated novel. But again, as I said though, from number 5 or from number 6 up to number 2, they are very interchangeable depending on my reading mood. They are some of the best self-published fantasy novels that I have ever read. However, for the number 1 spot, well, there is no change to this one. I have mentioned it too many times, I guess, but not enough. This is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This is the Raidmark Creative Edition, absolutely gorgeous edition, and yeah, this is still my favorite self-published fantasy novel, still my favorite standalone novel, and I think it will continue to remain that way. The emotional value, the emotional damage that I got from reading this book is absolutely unforgettable. Mamoru, Misaki, both of them are some of the best characters that I have ever read in any book. If you are picking up The Sword of Kaigen for the first time, I do highly recommend you to be patient for the first quarter. Believe me that once the actions and the conflict begins, you will not be able to put down some of the themes that tackled in this one. They are some of the heaviest to ever be put on the page, and Misaki, as I said, is just what an amazing character. Motherhood and also the price of war are some of the heaviest themes contained in The Sword of Kaigen, and personally speaking, I think everything about The Sword of Kaigen were extremely well written, and to think that this is a standalone novel, it is so mind-blowing to me. Reading this honestly felt equivalent to reading an incredible trilogy all at once in one book, in an efficient and also very effective manner. The duel scene in the Sword of Kaigen, for those of you who have read this one, will know what I'm talking about. The duel scene is so masterfully written, and it is one of the best duel scene I have ever read. It has been almost 5 years since the Sword of Kaigen was released for the first time. I think it was in February 2019, but I read this one in January 2019, and I did have a plan to actually do a second read of the Sword of Kaigen within this month, but I have no idea whether that's possible or not. But if not, then I think I will do my second read of the Sword of Kaigen on the 5th anniversary of my first time reading of the book, of my first time being emotionally scarred and damaged by the Sword of Kaigen. So yeah, that's it. That's my list of the best self-published fantasy books as of 2023. I know that this list will change a lot again the next time I make this kind of video, probably about 2 years from now. There are still so many self-published fantasy books and series that I want to read, like the Threadlight trilogy, the Gunmetal Gods, a series by Zamil Akhtar. The Threadlight trilogy is written by Zach Argyle. The War Eternal series by Rob J. Hayes, or the God Eater Saga, the upcoming God Eater Saga by Rob J. Hayes next year. And then there are just so many. So I expect this list to change a lot again. But if you think self-published fantasy are instantly inferior compared to traditional published fantasy, I think you are missing out on a lot of amazing fantasy books. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it from me today. Next week on Monday, which is on Christmas, I will post my list of the best books of 2023. And until then, do let me know what you think about my list, and also what are some of your favorite self-published fantasy books. As always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye. Lastly, I want to say thank you so much once again to all my patrons who keep on supporting me.